Welcome back to the Voices Encourage podcast. This is Steve Cary, your host and producer of the podcast. I'm once more stepping out from behind the scenes to continue our interview with KL Wells. And if you had not listened to part one yet, I recommend going back there. But even if you haven't listened to part one, we're going to dive right into where we left off. And a quick recap, we had talked about one of the most challenging parts of KL's journey with her son, Sam. As we left, Sam had just hit a low point and was going through addiction with fentanyl and then had checked into a rehab facility. And that's where I would like to start this conversation again, because at that point, that represents not only a low point for where Sam was in his journey, but it also represents an intense moment in your journey. And I think it's worth recapping how you handled yourself throughout that moment that was really fragile, the perspective of what might happen, and how you continued to have this mindset of thriving despite this extremely dangerous situation.
And so kind of revisiting that, what I've learned along the way is that on average, according to the National Institutes of Health, if people who are dealing with substance use disorder go into rehab, they're going to go in 4, 5, 6 times on average before recovery begins to take hold. And so this was a moment. Sam's 3,000 miles across the country. He's addicted to fentanyl. His roommate has moved out because it is an untenable situation with Sam, and he is left alone. And he is desperate. And he calls me in desperation and asks me to, quote, bring him home. My response was pretty much no. That's not going to serve right now. Rescuing him was not going to serve. And my hope was this was going to be, quote, what we eventually hope for is, quote, the bottom. That he would be desperate enough, and I know he's super resourceful, that he actually would find a recovery center in the area that he's in. However, when you're a mom and you're on the other end of the phone, and I said, I will call you tomorrow morning, I go to bed wondering what the heck happened. And so again, I was doing what I have been training myself to do, which is all the work so I could sleep, knowing full well I had a full meeting with my mastermind group the next day, my business mastermind group the next day, which I run and facilitate. And as I'm calling him on the way, he doesn't pick up. So there's no phone to be talking to him to find out how he's doing. And so I get to my meeting and I am fragile in that moment. And that's how I started the meeting was I said, there's something I need to let you know, that I am in fact very fragile right in this moment. But I don't want to give those moments of fragility. Like, I wasn't going to say, I'm having a bad day, which is a lot of times what people say. I don't want to have a completely bad day. I want to be able to have the skills to have these moments that might throw me, that might challenge me, and yet lean into the skills that I have in order to get present in my own life. And that's actually what happened. I mean, as I said it to them, I could feel myself relaxing because this is a group I love. They love me. I knew I was well taken care of. And then I could move into the work that I love to do and be present with them all day.
If we can stop right there, I think it's worth spending a moment. When I first hear you talk about acknowledging that you're fragile in that moment, that's not you getting into the moment. It's you acknowledging that state that you're in, so you can have the power, or you can have the agency to transition out of that. And as in your words, instead of having a bad day, you're giving it a moment, because that's what it calls for. It is extremely difficult, yet you're not going to let it take over the whole day. And I think that's the distinction that is really powerful, yet subtle. You have a meeting and you're acknowledging the state that you're in, but you're also, because you're doing that, that gives you the ability to move out.
If I had held to myself all day, I would have been preoccupied all day. And so by giving it voice and declaring where I was emotionally at that moment, And quite frankly, with a mastermind group, I'm very big on being vulnerable. They know the story. And so it would have been completely out of integrity for me not to have shared the moment with them. For years now, I have been very committed to living a life of thriving, even in the midst of loving Sam in his addiction.
Yeah. And it just brings back to mind one of the things that I'd heard you speak of, and it's in your book as well, is surround yourself with a community of people who are going to lift you up and support you. So this
Right.
mastermind group is a representation of that and a real life example of how you relied on that community in this moment.
Right.
And I think it's just worth the time to talk about it because it's easy to put that in paper
Mhm.
and say, yes, this is important, check the box and do it. But this is what it looks like in real life for you.
Well, I mean, with this particular mastermind, and I have two other groups that are also communities that hold the space for me in the midst of this journey extraordinarily well. But this particular mastermind, I put it together. My intention was that I could bring anything that was going on in my life to the table because we know half of the workforce is dealing with stuff that they are bringing into work and distracted by every single day. And so I wanted a place that was going to be psychologically, emotionally safe for me first, and therefore for all the members of that particular group. That was an intentionality when I started that group over 10 years ago. In that moment, I felt completely comfortable being vulnerable with them. And I know absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt that my ability to surf at a higher level in terms of thriving this whole journey around Sam has absolutely been buoyed by the great communities that I have created for myself.
Yep. And it's been, as you say, it has been extremely intentional. And it's, I just, when I hear that and I hear the story, it makes it tangible so I can
Mm.
really understand it. And so I hope for the listeners, it makes it seem something that is realistic to create on their own. So let's move on because I know the next part of this journey is, yes, you do know that Sam is in rehab and
Mhm.
yet you go into another information blackout
Mhm.
for that first 30 days. So let's talk about that and what that meant for you as a mother and how you yet managed to perform. What are some of the tools and techniques that you relied on to get you through that in a
Mhm.
thriving way?
Just to give a little bit more context, the day that I had that meeting, when I got home that night, I had a phone call from Sam saying that he had checked himself into a rehab facility. And so I was able to look it up online and kind of get a lay of the land of where he was. I like visualizations. And then there is this blackout period because he's in the first 30 days. Actually, it felt to me like it was probably about 2.5 months before I heard from him again. And so in that time period, I'm holding and suspending the stories that my mind would be making up about what possibly might be going on. That's big work because without information, our minds, our monkey minds will hijack us. And I'm very aware of that. And so again, being super clear that just because I thought it didn't make it something that I wanted to hang on to or actually entertain the notion. And so I was very intentional about the thoughts that I did want to have during the midst of this, believing that he was doing his work. And so if he was doing his work, I was going to be doing my work, which was this piece relative to what we think, but also making sure I had great sleep at night, doing the things that I love, getting out and hiking, spending time outside, aware of setting my day up for success from an emotional success perspective, but also an intellectual success perspective, making sure that I was not in communication with anybody that had negative energy around all of this and that would, what I call, hold the space for me to be in this journey without judgment. And I think for most of us that deal with this, the non-judgmental piece of the people that we surround ourselves is so important.
I want to come back to a few things you brought up because putting these techniques and strategies into tangible, I can do this type
Hmm.
activities is so
Hmm.
powerful. So
Hmm.
a couple takeaways that I'm hearing. One, this is hard work. It's not, you could just look at it from the surface and think, well, I'm not going to let those thoughts come in and that's going to be my battle. But no, you're not
Yeah.
saying that at all. This
Yeah.
is exercise and building up emotional resilience in the same way that we would
Right.
exercise our bodies to train for an event.
Mm-hmm.
Run a marathon, you have to train running. And what I hear you saying over and over again is that you are doing the foundational things to set yourself up in order to achieve this.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked about getting good sleep a lot, but that's the foundation that you start with, starting each day with an intention of what you want that day to be. Surrounding yourself with the people who are going to lift you up. And the distinction is it's not just people who are giving you a pat on the back and say, good job. These are the people
Mm-hmm.
who have compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Yet you are not going to allow in your life negative thinking or negative energy from people who might be bringing some level of negative energy about what might happen with Sam, or somebody who has loved ones in a similar scenario, but are not looking at it from the mindset that you are. And they might be thinking that there's no hope, all is lost. There's no way I can get through this. You are shielding people like that and surrounding yourself with people who are holding the space for you to
Mm-hmm.
understand what you're going through, allowing you to perform at the level that you want to be. I think I'm
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll give an example. There's a friend of mine that I've known for years. And when he relapsed, I forget which relapse it was, she said, doesn't he know what he's doing to you? And I took a breath and I thought, wow, you have no concept of what this disease really is. Of course, that's not even in the equation when they're in addiction mode. Survival takes the first position in their brains. He's not doing this to me. And I've never thought that he was doing this to me. Of course, I'm going through my own journey because it's super challenging to watch somebody that you love dearly suffer like this. But yeah, so that was one person I was like, okay, well, they're at arm's length for a bit.
That is such a powerful example because the way I described it, it might just put a label on don't let negative people into your life. That's a
Mhm.
friend. It's not a negative person, but their
Correct.
perspective
Hmm.
is different than yours at a fundamental level.
Hmm.
And if I can repeat that, does he even know what he's doing to you? And I hear you say that doesn't matter. That doesn't factor in. He's not doing anything to me. He's not in
Hmm.
control of what is happening in my mind. You are in control. And I think that is the fundamental lesson that I always take from this story. And it is a super powerful mind shift because
Hmm.
something bad happens in the world that affects you. And you make the decision right there that this is not happening to me. And you made that decision. So that's like the mindset, that's the emotional resilience, but it's also a decision that you have made,
Hmm.
self agency and choice in the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that we have far more agency and choice in these situations to determine who we're going to be in them and how we're going to either thrive or not than we give ourselves credit for. And the truth of the matter is, and I know this from this journey, and I know this from so many other people that I've met through this podcast along the way who are experts in this field and do really extraordinary work, is that blame, judgment serves no one. Absolutely serves no one. I'm not to blame for his disease, and he's not doing this to me. And I'm not angry about this. I'm sad about this to watch him suffer like this. And at the same time, I do have this very clear belief that this is a journey that he is on. And I'll begin to know what the purpose of his journey is, but I'm going to grab a hold of my journey in this as his mom and allow myself to feel and be cracked wide open from an emotional space and rise to the moment of what I would consider a spiritual awakening for me and a heart awakening, intellectual awakening, a complete paradigm shift of how I view life and trauma and crisis and our agency in it.
There's so much there. And the one thing I'll come back to so we can progress in the story, and I don't want to lose hold of any of this, so we will come back to it. But
Mhm.
these moments especially in that first window of time when and Sam's in a rehab, and you talk about the thoughts, the intrusive thoughts, and staying centered instead of spiraling into fear-based thinking.
Mhm.
All the things we just brought up, that is
Mhm.
a daily regimen. It's
Yes.
it's not a read a book and like, all right, I'm gonna be change my mindset. This is the work that you speak of when you say it requires me to do the work. And that is in effect the work, and it doesn't stop.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's minute by minute. I mean, the whole saying of it's one day at a time. Sometimes it's 1 minute at a time, or depending on what shows up. And I'm just very committed to growing the muscle strength emotionally and mentally and spiritually to be able to go pause before I respond. And you said earlier about kind of fighting off the thoughts. Well, I'm a big believer in what you resist persists. So it's not about fighting off the thoughts. It's recognizing that I'm having the thoughts and then letting them move through me and move on, and then replacing them with thoughts that are much more uplifting for me in the moment and throughout my day. And just being aware, because we all know that the contagion of negativity will take you down the drain just like that if you allow it.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's yet another tangible example of the exercise that you do. Makes it real for anybody listening to this that, yes,
Hmm.
you're not fighting it off, you're acknowledging it, recognizing it for what it is,
Hmm.
and letting it
Hmm.
go through. And there's probably some discomfort in that because instead of avoiding that moment, or it, as you said,
Yeah.
it could be very sad, recognizing it and then letting it go and moving on, or replacing that with something that is part of your intentional plan for the day and everything else that you're going through.
Yeah, and I mean, I have one belief, and I've had it for a couple, 3 decades maybe at this point, is that when you actually feel like your life is falling apart, like imploding, and I've had many of these moments, my brain is wired at this point to absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt that my life is actually falling together. When I get cracked wide open, I know it's to gain lessons and learn and become the next higher version of myself. And that's just from practice. And I want everybody to be super clear. I've had these drop dead, ugly cry to my knees, plenty of those moments throughout this whole journey. It's just my turn rate now is just much shorter and much shorter in terms of dealing with the things that show up in the midst of dealing with this disease.
Yeah. And I'm going to bring it back to training because that's what I reckon.
Yeah.
Training event and you're running and you run up a big hill and you can't make it. You're out of breath and you have to
Right.
walk and you're
Right.
just you can't recover easily enough. And yet you practice enough. And over time, yes, you can make it up the hill and your recovery time when you reach the top is tiny. And
Hmm.
then you can move on and on. It really is, in my mind, so similar when you are training the way that you are describing.
Yes, and this is a team sport too. I have people that I can call. Although there are those moments. I remember this wasn't with Sam, but I had something that happened a number of years ago that was really traumatic for me, and I couldn't get a hold of anybody. And that was another drop to my knees moment. I just cried it out. I'm like, okay, I'm not meant to get a hold of anybody. I'm meant to be in this moment with myself. And I sobbed until I was done. And then I slept. And then I eventually got a hold of my best friend. And then we next step, next step, next step. So yeah.
Yeah, it just represents this idea of not fighting off things that are
Mhm.
coming and letting them sit with them and then let them move through you and on. And
Mhm.
that's just another example of that. So let's go through what happens next. We have a moment of
Mhm.
time. Those first 30 days are critical or even longer, that first window of time.
Yeah. So obviously the self-care component for me, super important. Anytime something happens that challenges me in a certain way at a higher level, I'm like, okay, I got to up my skills. So I kind of dial into, okay, what am I doing? And what can I add to what I'm doing that's going to continue to keep me in that thriving space so I can live the life that I want to live. And there were a number of times, and this might have been one of them, where I just pulled Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, off the shelf. And that's the book that I read every night and every morning. And so it kept me in that space of being present. And in those moments, I wasn't suffering. And then Byron Katie's work, Loving What Is, the 4 questions, that work is incredibly important too. So again, it's who you surround yourself with is who you become. So I pick authors that elevate me. I pick music that elevates me. I pick podcasts that elevate me. And I pick friends that elevate me. So all of those things are part of a strategy for staying elevated.
And the daily routine.
The daily routine.
Because it doesn't happen by itself, is what I'm hearing.
No. And I mean, and I was saying to you before we got on, there are days now, because Sam's coming up on 2 years clean and sober. There are days I don't even think about him because I'm busy living my life. And so for a lot of parents, that is a big lift to get to that point. And it's so relieving. Don't get me wrong. There are those moments where I kind of wake up and I go, gee, I wonder what's happening, and there may be a moment that happened, I don't know, 3 weeks ago where I had this nagging thought. And that was basically my little post-traumatic stress that maybe something's wrong. And so I'm like, oh, okay, here it is again. So work. That one was particularly nagging for some reason. And I worked it out, but then I also figured out a way, okay, let me just ping him, because he's available on text and he's working and doing all the things. And if I can just get a ping back, okay, we're good. But at the same time, I was still doing all the work.
Right. And that's the part that stands out. It doesn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move back in time, because the part we want to get to in this story is Sam enters recovery. He'd gone through the first period of time, during that blackout. So you described what you've been doing at that time. At some point, you get an indication that he is, in fact, still safe in recovery. He didn't leave, or there's that information blackout is removed a little bit.
And so, I mean, he was in a recovery program treatment for a year before he graduated to kind of a transitional house with guys from that program. And all indications along the way were that is what he was doing. He was committed to it. And I believe that. And so then I also did my life and did all the things that we've been talking about in terms of self-care. What I've learned partly along the way is this regimen of self-care that I play at now kind of got, to some extent, this extra level got birthed because of this experience with Sam. But it serves me super well with the numbers of clients that I work with and the world that we're living in right now. We are in chaos and disruption at a big level. And with AI happening and geopolitical things happening and so on and so forth, his journey of substance use disorder was such a gift because I chose to take it as an opportunity to skill up. And now those skills are in place and I'm able to move through and surf what's taking place at such a high level that I do get people saying, like, I don't even know how you're doing this. But they haven't been through the journey like I have, and they haven't stayed committed to the intentionality of it and so on and so forth, which is totally fine. What I kind of want to get to is that year is super important. That year was really important because Sam had never been clean and sober more than a year. And I wanted to be on the other side of that year. And then he got to the year, and then it appeared he was still in the groove of it in terms of recovery, back working again at work that he loves. And then it was like, okay, 13 months and then 14 months. And in the midst of that, his stepsister passes away. And this was late June of 2024. And there had not been a reconciliation between the two of them when she passed. And so he's in transitional living, and I get a phone call from him that this has taken place. And he's devastated because there will never be a reconciliation, at least in physical form.
Sounds like as well.
And Sam is very connected to his family, whether they talk often or not. And that is, I think, one regret that he could have held on to that he didn't, quote, make the reconciliation take place. And that's partly where I think I was able to help give him some perspective on that. That was on his sister. It wasn't on him. And she was not in a place to want to extend reconciliation to him. And so I think all of us have those moments where somebody gets mad at us and cuts us off and we're left with that open space. And then it just got a little messy with that side of the family. And at that point he wanted to go to, if they did a celebration of life, well, they didn't want it. So how do you navigate this? And of course, these are super painful moments that are ripe for relapse. And so he had his own work to do around this, which fortunately he had set himself up to be supported through all of this with a great sponsor, a great men's group, another group that he goes, his home group, his girlfriend, and me, to be able to love him in the moment and support him in this moment. And then as his mom, for me to, again, dig in, do my work, and hold the space for him to be strong and continue his recovery journey, even in the midst of this really sad experience.
So there's a lot going on there across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And the big takeaway here is easily this could have been a scenario where he could have gone into a relapse.
Sure.
And from your perspective, you recognizing the situation for what it is. But you're in another situation where you're at a position where you could let the fear take over. And I'm certain that's not what happened, but yet you were challenged by that. Escalation, I think, is maybe a better way to put it, an escalation of the crisis. And the acknowledgement that you are not in control of this could happen.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, anytime something happens along these lines, there is always the possibility of relapse, I think. And so just kind of knowing that and not allowing it to, again, hijack you. Knowing it is one thing. Letting the possibility of relapse hijack you before there is a relapse is insanity. So I'm just not willing to do that. And so awareness, and then, okay, continuing to do my work from a mental, emotional, spiritual perspective. I did make a phone call to his uncle because there were some miscommunications, and Sam was pretty fragile, obviously, at this moment. And I wanted to know for myself what was the story. I mean, honestly, I'd never even spoken to his uncle for 30 years, but I didn't hesitate to reach out to him and get some clarification. And fortunately, he was willing to get clarification. And I said, it would be really great if you and Sam could talk. And that all happened. And so I was just a conduit for that conversation to take place. And I was happy to do it. And things unfolded from there.
In observation, everything that you brought up touches on this point that you made very clear earlier in the conversation, this hard-held belief that you have that when life feels like it's falling apart, it's falling together. And it sounds like it's almost too good to be true or too simple to be true. Yet everything that you've discussed in this conversation is an evidence to how that works. It's a simple statement and a simple belief, and it works because it's simple, but that underneath it is a huge amount of effort and intentionality that takes place. And when you're in these situations that you just described, the death of his stepsister, all these other situations that you're able to be part of and help and work through, you're operating at a high level because you had the opportunity to adopt a challenging training. You tested yourself, you say you skilled up. And now you're demonstrating that by the way that you're operating on all of these scenarios. So it bears mentioning, just because sometimes we hear those things and it sounds like lip service, but underneath the surface, there is a deep amount of just regular work that each one of these steps can be easy and simple, but the consistency of them over time is the part that needs the attention and the work. But you're a living, breathing proof of what it looks like.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two things I'm thinking about. One is it's a little bit like these moments can give you permission to get off your schedule, to almost like give you, it's like the little saboteur in my head could say, well, this is a really crappy situation. This is full of all the possibilities that wouldn't look good. I'm just going to go to bed for a week, you know? And so just knowing that, but at the same time, looking back on it, and it's really hasn't even been a year yet to look on it and go, that was a great opportunity for Sam to test his recovery. And he did awesome. And so again, muscle strength. He had recovery muscle strength. I had recovery muscle strength. And we both got tested in that moment. And we both, I think, passed with flying colors. Not to say that it was easy by any stretch of the imagination. However, we done our work.
I have a question I want to ask, and I think you'll get what I'm trying to say, but I know
Okay.
it's probably going to be not something that you can answer directly. But there are a lot of people out there who may have a similar journey with their loved one that Sam has gone through. Hits a really low point. They go through multiple recoveries. Finally, they hit a low of the lows and they say, you know what, I'm going to change. And they do, they come out the other side. However, I think there are a lot of people who have not gone through that process yet, have not done the work that you have done. And I'll frame it this way. You brought up the person who said, doesn't he even know what he's doing to you?
Yeah.
Can you imagine what your life would be like? Same scenario with Sam, but you had not done the work that you described. And I'm asking not so much like, not what would it look like, but there's a contrast. And there's a lot of people who may live in that other version and they're
Hmm.
still maybe feeling of they did this to me. And they're probably still, they are recovering. So I'm just wondering if you can give some perspective
Well,
that might have.
yeah, how I think about that, it's an external orientation. Like our peace and happiness, we give out to the world. And when things don't go the way we think they should, then we're sad or we're depressed or we're angry or whatever that is. I'm joyful. I'm happy. I can laugh. I can be in the bliss of my life despite what's going on around me. And the biggest challenge for me has been Sam's journey to help me fine tune the skills to be centered and still happy, joyful, be able to laugh, put this in the perspective of this is my journey. That's his journey. And I think I have experienced way too many people that are just angry because they have done it to them. That's how they view it. They can't even imagine thriving while this is going on. They're looking for blame. They're angry. That's where they stay is angry, sad, traumatized, unwilling to do the work of basically forgiveness. And forgiveness is for us. It's for us to release our pain. It doesn't absolve whatever took place. I can't stretch that far to think about what that would actually look like, sound like, and feel like. I don't allow myself to be around people that are holding that kind of energy. So it's almost a black box to me on the other side. When I start to touch that kind of energy, I'm like, I'm not going there because it's fragile. You can feel yourself kind of getting hooked a little bit by the negativity and the external orientation. And I'm about the internal orientation so that I can live the life that I want to live.
Lex, for those people who may be in that situation, stuck in fear, chaos,
Mhm.
uncertainty,
Mhm.
and yet they don't want to be there,
Mhm.
what will you tell them right now just to give them some semblance of what they could do to start their journey similar to what you've gone through?
Well, one is there's another way to do this other than to be captive to the disease and also be imprisoned by the disease. There's another way. And interestingly enough, the paradox of this is that the more I did my work, the more it freed Sam to do his.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this before. Beverly Buncher has created a program called be a loving mirror. So if you're interested, go to voicesencouraged.com/family to check it out. It's an extraordinary program that helps people walk through the steps to get to what I'm talking about today. And so, because I'm not that put together a program that's already there that I believe in and that I love, and I think it will change people's lives, but I'm a big believer. And obviously, I wrote a little book about self-care, the 5 acts of courage. How do you take care of yourself in the midst of loving somebody dealing with substance use disorder? So all I can really say is there's a different way. There's a better way. There's a more joyful way. There is a way that allows you to have a life while your loved one is in the midst of their disease. And if you're even remotely curious about that, then reach out. Go to voicesencouraged.com. We have tremendous list of resources that are available on the site. Listen to my TED Talk, listen to the podcast. There are resources out there for people to grab a hold of and become a student of, and know that there's the potentiality for, if you really do your work, it opens up the door for your loved one to do theirs.
I think that's a perfectly good place to end on. And I don't think I could say it any better after listening to the story over the last 2 episodes. I think that's quite profound. And Gail, thank you for sharing all of your stories so openly. There are people who need to hear this, that are hearing this, and it's helping them. We know that for a fact. So thank you for that alone. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we part ways?
Well, I want to thank you for doing this. You are behind the scenes most of the time. And so to come out behind the scenes and on camera, I completely appreciate that piece for you. So again, thank you for that. And for being on this journey this long. This is a team sport too. And I just want people to know that there's hope. And that's why I tell my story. That's why I'm open about all these pieces of the journey. There aren't enough people that are telling their side of the story. Somebody's gotta.
Yeah. Your goal and mission behind this platform is to help 1 million people to become thriving despite the chaos in their lives. By sharing your story, you can have an impact on another listener who may start their own journey. And every time you have an impact on somebody else, that's exponential in its reach. So this idea of reaching 1 million people and helping them to thrive throughout their own journeys and the chaos that they're going through is amazingly realistic. And I'm happy to be part of that. That's my motivation. So that's a great takeaway. I think there's so much that can be done with this idea that you've put together behind the idea that thriving is a choice. There are resources just for people to know that they have the option to make that decision. It doesn't happen overnight, but the decision does. It happens immediately. And then you just start.
Yeah, commit. And then one other thing that I know to be absolutely true is find people that are thriving in the midst of this chaos. So we've had people on our podcast that are great examples of thriving in the midst of the chaos, loving another son or a spouse or people that they love, and find people that are thriving in the midst, because they are your greatest teachers.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you. And so set an intention of thriving.
All right. Until next time.
Take care.